I know they go on a lot about President Biden's age. Don't really understand that one because he's only a few years older than Diaper Don. But there is one person who seems to have slipped under the radar. Spiderweb herself, like some crusty cobweb in the corner. Virginia Foxx. Now, it's not so much her age; it's just her mind, her brain. She's just vile. Am I wrong? Please, if you are of the opinion as well that she's vile, just press the like button. I can't work out anything she's achieved. She just seems to just have something about the air of hate about her. Crusty is what I've dubbed her, but I could have got it wrong. Again, like button if you think yes, Miss Foxx is just vile. To compare how she goes about, let's take Jasmine Crockett and Jared Moskowitz, okay? And see how they are as representatives in comparison to Crusty Foxx. And again, if you think she has just vileness, press the like button now.
Back. Does any member wish to seek, does any member seek recognition? Mr. Bowman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to strike the last word.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
I would like to speak in opposition to this amendment for several reasons. Number one, since New York City has been mentioned multiple times, and since my background is as an educator in New York City schools, I just want to highlight for everyone in the audience and my colleagues across the aisle that New York City is what we consider a Title I district. It's a school system that cannot survive without the Title I funds that come from the federal government. The reason why the federal government had to step in, I believe, in 1965 to provide Title I resources to lower income communities is because of redlining that was allowed by the federal government in past legislation, which led to the underfunding, the chronic underfunding of schools simply based on race. If you were Black or Latino in a particular community, your schools were underfunded, while schools in white suburban communities that had access to federal funds to buy housing, those schools received additional funding. So now this amendment seeks to double down on prior racist policy by implementing present-day racist policies in targeting of Title I school districts. I also want to take exception to the term invasion as we describe what's happening here with immigrants, migrants coming to our country seeking asylum. There's a long history of that word invasion being used to describe migrants, particularly from Latino countries, coming into our country by white supremacists in their fear-mongering around the arrival of immigrants in our country. So I take incredible exception to that word invasion. We are not being invaded. People are coming here to seek asylum, as is the history of the United States. Much of this anti-immigrant rhetoric and policy is aligned to something called the Great Replacement Theory, which was condemned by this Congress in last Congress, and I am proud to be the author of that resolution. The Great Replacement Theory states that the white race is under attack by blacks, Jews, and immigrants, and we must do something about it. And many of the mass shooters in our country have identified the Great Replacement Theory as being the motivating factor to their mass shooting, including the Buffalo mass shooting in upstate New York. So the hateful, divisive rhetoric is in the resolution. The hateful, divisive rhetoric is a part of one of the amendments. The hateful, divisive rhetoric is historical as per redlining, and the anti-immigrant sentiment is directly connected to the Great Replacement Theory. Now, I know none of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will admit to being racist, and I don't think they are. But when you look at the rhetoric and you hear the talking points and look at the legislation that's put forward, what are we to say?
The gentleman will suspend. I want to remind the gentleman that you cannot engage in characterizing the other members' positions or calling their position, engaging in personality characterizations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just very frustrating because it seems like the legislation itself engages in personalities when it refers to a group of people that is derogatory. So if the legislation is doing it, and we're using words on the other side of the aisle like invasion, as if it's an army coming to our country, is that not personalities? Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
The distinguished gentlewoman from Dallas is recognized, Ms. Crockett.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go at this a little bit differently. First of all, let me thank each and every one of you for your service to our country. And I think that as members of Congress, we should do everything that we can to support you, and we should listen to you, because this is the work that you do every day, and it's why we bring you in to testify. Seemingly, everyone has different ideas of what you do instead of wanting to listen to you. But nevertheless, I think we could save a lot of time if Congress worked remotely, because I know time and money. Because I know that it takes me almost 3 hours to get here from Dallas. I've got another freshman colleague that is from Hawaii, and we all know what happened in Hawaii here recently. And she travels and leaves her husband and her 2 boys to get here, yet seemingly showing up to work doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna get anything done. Because the last time I checked, we are currently facing a government shutdown. It is pending, and people have shown up, but they have not shown up to actually do the work. So we're concerned about telework, but what we really need to be concerned about is whether or not we're gonna do our work when we're in the building, because we are the ones that are supposed to make sure that we pass appropriations bills so that we can fund what you're doing as we talk about backlogs. So let me talk about some of the reasons for some of the backlogs that have been brought up. By a show of hands, I'm curious to know, any of your agencies, are they at 100% capacity as it relates to having the workforce that you need? No one? Ain't none of y'all got 100 people? Oh, okay. So maybe you need some money so that you can hire some people. Let me also ask you, and I know that it was brought up a little bit earlier, I believe it was you, Mr. Dorman, that talked about the fact that you are looking at what private industry is doing and competing. Is it not true, and anyone who feels like I am stating a falsehood, please say something. Is it not true that the majority of private industry is offering flexibility and better pay than the federal government right now? Okay, all right, so it is hard to compete because number one, we ain't giving y'all no money. Number two, we're showing up every day, but we not doing our jobs because we seemingly are about to shut down, because I don't know how I'm just a freshman. But from what I've been told, I don't know how we're gonna get through 12 appropriation bills in all this time, especially when we keep cutting votes back because they don't have the votes. So we may need to focus on how we can do better at our jobs and support you so that y'all can take care of our constituents. So with that, there are options on the table. Republicans and Democrats, we need to come together and find common ground. And we did this a little earlier this year. I was working on a retention option because in June, I led a letter to the Secretaries of Defense and State and the OPM director about concerns regarding the retention of federally employed military spouses. This letter was co-led by a Republican actually on my oversight committee. I also introduced an amendment to the NDAA directing the Secretary of Defense to provide employment flexibility to military spouses deployed by the department. This amendment was co-sponsored by several Republicans, including, again, one on oversight. The military is currently facing a recruitment crisis. This is why it's important More important than ever, that we retain current military families. Over 1/3 of active duty military families cite difficulties securing spousal employment as a reason for leaving the service. In fact, in the past decade, military spouses have experienced persistently high unemployment rates, hovering around 21%, nearly 7 times the national average. Consider Jessica, a military spouse of 19 years, currently stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas, with her active duty spouse. Jessica is a senior passport specialist with the State Department. Her husband recently submitted his Army retirement packet because his transfer order meant Jessica wouldn't be able to work at State because it doesn't offer remote or telework flexibilities. How is this protecting our country? And I'm sure the majority of you never heard about this bipartisan amendment. You heard about all the other trash that they wanted to put on the floor that had nothing to do with keeping our country safe. What we need to do is focus in on the priorities. And the priorities aren't culture wars. That's not the priorities. The priorities are making sure that people are working and people are safe. And regardless of what the president said, and I love the president, I support him. Let me say that right now. COVID is still around. We have members that are out right now because they are sick with COVID. So for those that missed the memo, COVID does still exist, and these flexibilities allow people to not only be safe, but they also make sure that we are keeping our country safe. So thank you for what you do every day. Thank you for putting up with these questions. Thank you for fighting for a country that somehow doesn't seem like it's fighting half as hard for you and your employees. And with that, I would just ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement from the Parallel Professionals, EFM, MOH, and the U.S. Department of State Employee Organizations for the spouses, partners of foreign service professionals who are civil servants, government contractors, and who work at U.S. missions abroad. Mr. Chairman.
That'll be entered the record. Thank you very much.
And I will yield.
Gentlewoman yields back your time.
Carolina, Ms. Foxx, Representative Foxx, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for being here. Dr. Wubenhorst, thank you for your service to our nation as a practicing OBGYN and working with USAID during the Trump administration. It's always great to have fellow North Carolinians here. Democrats have the distinction of holding the truly extreme position on abortion today. Twice during the 117th Congress, nearly every single Democrat voted in favor of the so-called Women's Health Protection Act, which should be called the Abortion on Demand Until Birth Act. This bill reveals their agenda for the United States: abortion on demand until birth in every state. Dr. Wubenhorst, in your understanding, would this bill even abolish laws that prevent aborting a baby just because of a Down syndrome diagnosis or because of the sex of the baby?
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman Dr. Foxx. Yes, I believe that this bill would go very far towards abolishing any protective laws for disabled fetuses.
But it would be protecting those babies that have Down syndrome or because of their sex, correct?
The law would be?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this extreme bill, that Women's Health Protection Act, would in fact place the United States back in the company of countries such as China and North Korea.
That's correct.
Right, and again, the Women's Health Act would not protect babies from being aborted because of their sex.
Yes, and I think that that's an important point. If we look at the coercive abortion practices in many countries, in particular China, and I would also add to that countries in sub-Saharan Africa, where foreign aid has been tied to abortion or to our promotion of abortion, I think that that's an important consideration, yes.
Thank you for giving an example of other countries and what company that puts us in. A Harvard University poll from June 2022 showed that 90% of Americans believe that there should be some legal limits on abortion. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it also correct that this poll showed that a majority of Democrats in this poll supported protections for the unborn after 15 weeks?
Yes.
I believe this constitutes a majority of all Americans. It seems to me that it is the Democrats who hold the extreme positions on abortion, and they hold the views contrary to the will of most Americans. And I find it really interesting that there are people who say this is an act of self-determination. It is one thing to be determining what happens in your own body. It's another thing to be determining the life of an unborn child that you are carrying. And I'm often reminded of The Merchant of Venice, where in The Merchant of Venice, there was a deal made that if a man could not pay his debt, he would give a pound of his flesh. And in court, the defense lawyer said, "You may have your pound of flesh, but you may not take a drop of blood." And it seems to me that elective abortion should be compared to that, because you may be self-determining for your body, but what are you doing to the body, to the child in your own body? Dr. Wubahorst, is there anything you've heard today you'd like to respond to or correct for the record?
Well, I do think, as I said earlier, that abortion is not health care. It's also very important to point out that there are no data to support the assertion that increasing rates of abortion, or in fact that abortion at all, has any effect on maternal mortality. Again, you would have to reconcile the fact that African American women have the highest rates of maternal mortality and the highest rates of abortion, and both of those cannot be true if it's the case that abortion has an effect on maternal mortality. I would also like to add that the questions regarding miscarriage and care and ectopic pregnancy care have been frequently misrepresented in the media, and it's important to set the record straight. Miscarriage, treatment of a miscarriage is not an abortion. Treatment of an ectopic pregnancy is not an abortion.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
For 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to oppose the removal of Congresswoman Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I begin by asking, what is the crime? You see, this is a question that many in this country have been asking over the last week. What is the crime? Now, many were referring to Tyree Nichols, but I'm asking this question as it relates to Congresswoman Omar. Was her so-called crime allegedly committing fraud in Brazil? Was her so-called crime allegedly breaking campaign finance laws during her election to Congress? Was her so-called crime stealing from a roommate? Was her so-called crime defrauding and outright lying to her constituents? No, none of the above. But these are crimes that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have no qualm in countenancing when it is politically expedient. So I ask again, what is the crime? There are those that have been accused of and or under investigation for participating in attacking our very democracy here on January 6th, and they have been seated on committees. So here we are with our first African-born member of Congress who has not been accused of the above crimes or any crimes, and we are wasting taxpayer dollars debating her removal from her duly appointed position on foreign affairs. Are you shutting me off?
Expired.
Thank you. So I ask again, what is her crime? With that, I yield back.
No, again, just to reiterate the point, but I rather than my words or my opinion, I think I'm going to quote Senator Ted Cruz, who the chairman appeared on his podcast. And in fact, just to remind the chairman of Ted's own advice to the chairman, I made a board for you, Mr. Chairman. You were on the show with Ted Cruz, in which Ted Cruz said to you, I'm going to give you some unsolicited advice. Now, by the way, Ted Cruz, right, clerked at the Supreme Court. He knows the Constitution pretty well. But you guys know who Ted Cruz is, right? He's run for president a couple times. So Ted Cruz said to you, Mr. Chairman, you should have Hunter Biden in a public hearing. He actually said his advice to you is just have him in a public hearing. And again, I go back to what is the majority so concerned, or to use some of the words of my colleagues, afraid to have Hunter Biden sit at this desk Mr. Chairman, you control the rules. You could give everybody 10 minutes. You could give everybody 15 minutes. You could give everybody 20 minutes. You could give your side as much time. We could go on for days here, quite frankly, because, again, you control the rules, as you just showed. But the one difference that you guys object to is you object to those. You object to the cameras because you don't want the American people to hear the answers. No, you want to take the transcript and release it 6 months after you've gone out and lied about what has happened. And so, again, because the gentle lady from Georgia, I know is such an advocate for women's rights, as she mentioned, and is so concerned about grooming, and apparently we don't have any standards here anymore. Again, I just want to remind my colleagues, because, you know, I don't want them to forget about hypocrisy, okay? I don't want them to forget about hypocrisy. But, you know, Donald Trump was asked about Jeffrey Epstein, and when he was asked, he said, you know, Jeffrey likes him young. Well, how did the president know that? How did he know that Jeffrey Epstein likes him young? Perhaps some people are saying he was there, since you're so concerned, right? But again, I bring this up not to make jest. I bring it
Point
up.
of order, Mr. Chairman.
I bring it up. I thought we weren't going to interrupt.
We're going to stop the clock. We did this with Ms.
Okay.
Green. State your point.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the impugning of the former president's character. That
I don't have to do that. He does that himself.
Have we basically thrown that rule out? I'm just curious, or are we going to follow that rule?
Would you accept a pornographic photo?
Of Bill Clinton?
Yeah, we suspended the rule to the current president, but we didn't suspend it to the former president. But.
Oh, by the way, please, so you're making the point that we can disparage Joe
right.
Biden, but not Donald Trump. Please make that point to the American people. Mm-hmm. Please.
And
Bill Clinton's not running for office.
That's my point of order, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
I'll wrap
we
it up.
suspended the rule on the disparaging the current president because this is a contempt proceeding with the Biden. So he's part of the investigation.
But the rule remains in place for all prior presidents,
I
including.
would say that, but in all honesty, they've broken the rule many times today.
Mr. Chairman, it doesn't apply to prior presidents.
It does not apply to former.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Listen, I won't talk about the photo and the 11 of them and the fact that he was on the plane and on the island anymore. What I will point out is the hypocrisy of today. The hypocrisy of today is you want to hold you guys break the rules by not complying with subpoenas in the last Congress, and now you're shocked. You can't believe after you broke all of that now it doesn't work. You come up here and talk about Hunter Biden's behavior, and you're so disgusted. But the guy that you all kneel to, okay, associates himself with a pedophile. But remember, I get
Mr.
it.
Chairman,
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, that should be stricken.
I ask his words taken down.
A statement
That
of a
should be
fact, and it's his
stricken.
time.
It's a
Mr. Chairman.
fact.
I asked his words to be taken
Okay,
down.
there's a motion to strike the words.
Yeah.
Yes.
On what
Mr.
grounds? On what grounds?
To say that we associate with pedophiles.
No, he was
Thank you, Mr. Burleson. And now we'll recognize Dr. Foxx from North Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses today for being here, and especially for all the history lessons that we're getting today. I think it's wonderful that we can get a good perspective on what has happened in the past, so I thank you. Ms. Vargas, under federal law, every private sector employee has the right to choose whether or not to authorize automatic payroll deductions of union dues from their paycheck or become a union member. In your current position as a public defender, you're represented by the United Auto Workers. Could you discuss whether UAW officials who are supposed to represent your best interest respected your rights to make choices about automatic dues deductions and union membership?
I was ignored. So when I just was ignored. I was totally ignored by the officials of the UAW. and they did not explain anything to me. It was my insistence and having to go after them and constant emailing them was before I got a response. And even then, the onus is on the individual. They will not help you. They did not help.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Gary, according to your written testimony, when you worked as a nurse at Kent Hospital in Rhode Island, the hospital was unionized by the United Nurses and Allied Professionals. You did not vote for or support the union. However, under federal law, you're forced to be represented and work under a collective bargaining agreement negotiated by a union you did not support. Can you discuss whether you think it's fair that you were forced to associate with a union that you wanted nothing to do with?
No, I don't think it is fair that I was forced to participate and pay dues and fees in this union. As a matter of fact, not only was I forced to do so, but because I was outspoken as to my opinion regarding this union, I was punished. I was punished on the job. I was punished personally. I was followed home at night. I was threatened by union reps. I was told my car would be keyed. It was a nightmare for me. I hear a lot here about unions and the wonderful things they do, but I think a lot of this is a facade. I represent the reality of what really happens to people who want to exercise their First Amendment rights of freedom of speech and freedom of association. And that is how I feel. This is America. We should be allowed to choose. And if unions are that good, they will sell themselves.
Yeah, I think you're right. I agree with you completely. Mr. Mix, right-to-work detractors say the law is unfair to unions. They usually cite the, quote, free rider, end quote, argument that right-to-work laws allow workers to benefit from union representation without paying for it. And again, thank you for the little history lesson that you just gave. Can you respond to the free rider argument and discuss why unions jealously guard their monopoly status?
Yeah, that's right. And there's a couple of quotes that are pretty interesting. Bill Gould, who was the general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board in the Clinton administration, said that the law would allow for member-only bargaining, et cetera. Obviously, there's issues that need to be settled. But I think the most relevant quote was from Robert Reich, who was the Secretary of Labor at the time. He said, unions have to have a way to strap their members to the mast. And boy, if that's what the Secretary of Labor says about how union officials need to treat their members, they're worried about workers defecting from the union. And the only way they can guarantee they don't is to force them under these compulsory unionism regimes. And it just doesn't make any sense. If they really are doing great things, as Jeanette said, they will attract workers. I mean, build it and they will come. And we believe that. And I don't think there's anybody on the panel from that side or this side that would block an individual's right to join a union, associate with the union, again, give their entire paycheck to a union. But force and compulsion have no place in this, whether it be in this law or in state law.
Thank you very much. And I completely agree with you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Foxx, and we're almost done. We will now
I come in this committee, and just when I think I can't be shocked anymore, I get shocked to the next level. And I listened to Dan, who I was with him in Israel in August, and I listened to him tell very real stories of real issues that are taking place in this world right now, issues that we have been charged with the responsibility of being the adults in the room and trying to solve. And as I listened to him, I thought, man, I was actually going to deal with what we're supposed to be talking about. And then, of course, I get a colleague from the other side of the aisle who could hear of the pain and suffering as Dan was telling the stories, and the only thing that he heard, because it's seemingly what happens in this chamber, is that there's a level of callousness and a lack of humanity a lot of times. We say the words, we care about the American people, but then the actions don't line up with caring about the American people. And so after hearing that story, the only thing that my colleague heard was about made-up evidence as it relates to the former president, the twice impeached, 91 indicted count former president who's currently sitting in a fraud trial, who's also been found liable of sexual assault. The only thing that he heard was this bit about made-up evidence. And so he says, well, the Democrats didn't have the right to do what they did when they impeached the president. I disagree. And it looks like at least 4 grand juries feel like they've got some evidence, or maybe that's made up as well. Or maybe once the convictions come down, which there will be a conviction in some territory, I say that with all confidence as someone who was practicing law for 17 years. I'm sure they will say that that was made up. I'm sure that they don't believe the co-defendants that have come out and pled guilty as it relates to the charges in Georgia, and I'm sure they think that that's made up. Just like they said that January 6th was made up after they ran for their lives, and I'm sure that they believe that the convictions that came out of January 6th, those were made up too. But let me tell you what's not made up as they live in their fairy tale world. What's not made up is that the government has a looming shutdown in 3 days, and they decided to drag you in and talk about the job that you're not doing. And before I go into it, I do appreciate the work that you do, especially as a girl that grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and fondly remembers the better days of Missouri when your father was the governor. So I will tell you what is not made up and what is real life. Number one, I want to recenter us on what it is your job is. Your job ain't got nothing to do with telework last time I checked. Is that true or not?
That's correct.
Okay, all right, because I don't know how the American people are going to get this straight when the members of Congress can't really figure out what your job is. So that's not your job. But you deal with a lot of real estate. So I just want to zone in on that because I don't have too much time left. But for those that don't understand, there's government leases, and most commercial leases go for more than a year, say, right?
Yes.
Yeah, usually more than maybe even 2 years, right?
Yes.
Usually a commercial lease is a very long-term lease, correct?
And the price usually goes down the longer the term.
Absolutely. So typically you're inclined to sign a longer lease, all right? But none of us saw COVID-19 happening. And while we are centered on talking about telework, it is really important that we zone in on something that you've said over and over and people are ignoring you. You said what makes it difficult for you to do your job is a lack of certainty. And this government shutdown, this is the second one just this year that we're running up on, and we're kicking the can down the road because we're going to run up on another one in January. It looks like we're going to run up on 2 now, January and February, if they can get this passed. Can you please explain why a lack of certainty has a negative impact on you doing what you are charged to do for the American people?
Yeah, thanks for that question. You know, real estate is a long-term thing. When you're buying a house or you're buying a piece of property, you don't just do that overnight. You have to plan your finances to make sure that it works. And when it comes to the federal government, it's not different. We have to have, particularly when we're maintaining buildings, we have to have a plan. We've got the biggest commercial real estate portfolio in the country. They're all in a different state of need, and we need to be able to have plans to address those things. And the only way you do that is with some certainty. And not having clarity about what a budget's going to be and kicking the can down to the road to the next year doesn't make the cost go down. It makes the cost go up. And so we've seen that happen over and over again because, again, of this lack of funding of the Federal Buildings Fund.
And you know what? To be clear, I remember when we had the first government shutdown looming, and we all have our own leases for our properties as well. I had to call my property manager and say, because the federal government can't get their stuff together, just so you know, I may not be able to pay my bills, and I hope you don't kick me out. That's not any way that we should be governing and talking about the fact that we are actually being fiscally responsible, because it's just the opposite of it. Thank you so much for your dedication to this country. I really appreciate your time and for you putting up with the antics.
Would the gentlelady yield to a question? Fine.
The ranking member of the full committee, Dr. Foxx, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, your written testimony did not mention the word inflation, but I will. On Friday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics had bad news for consumers and retirees, but it confirmed what consumers are already feeling. Over the last 12 months, inflation increased 8.6%, the largest 12-month increase in more than 40 years. Energy prices are up 34.6%, food prices are up 10.1%, shelter prices up 5.5%, the price of new vehicles up 12.6%, and the price of used cars and trucks up 16.1%. With inflation running rampant and squeezing families, workers, small businesses, and retirees, what is DOL doing to ensure new regulations and the large increase in spending it is requesting will not exacerbate inflation?
Thank you, Ranking Member Foxx. There's no question that inflation is causing pain for families in America. And that's why the President certainly has been very focused on lowering the costs that families face and reduce the federal deficit as well. We're making real progress, but quite honestly, the inflation issue that we're dealing with in the United States of America is not just being dealt with in the United States of America, it's being dealt with all across the globe. What we're doing what I'm doing at the Department of Labor is working number one, on the supply chain issues to get more goods and services into our country. Part of the inflation is due to lack of goods and supplies coming into this country in the early days of the pandemic. We're working with across agency lines to bring the cost of inflation down. I think that we can't ignore the fact that inflation was not caused by President Joe Biden. The inflation was not caused by the American Rescue Plan, and the inflation will not be exacerbated by making other investments in job training, workforce development, worker protections. What we have to do, we have a war in Ukraine, and we're still dealing with a global pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I think we strongly disagree on the fact that this is not being caused by the Biden administration and the American Rescue Plan. Definitely those are the issues. Even Democrats are saying that. Mr. Secretary, on October 27, you participated in strike activity at Kellogg's plant in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Your one-sided participation on behalf of the union in this strike was inappropriate. As Secretary of Labor, you have an obligation to demonstrate impartiality in both appearance and in form. I've twice written to you about this matter and have yet to receive a written response. I'll ask you again, did you seek ethics advice from DOL's attorney prior to your visit to Kellogg plant, yes or no?
Well, I will tell you, I did go out to the Kellogg to talk to the workers. I went out there to try and be helpful.
Mr. Secretary,
and
did you seek attorney's advice?
Of course I did.
That's all I need to know.
Of course I did.
Okay, and so will you provide me any written guidance or advice you received on the legality of this visit or your ethical obligations related to the visit?
I'll also give you information on the conversation I had with the CEO of Kellogg last week.
Okay. Will you commit to respond comprehensively in writing all the questions in my previous 2 letters by the end of this week?
I don't know what the questions are in your letter.
Okay, we've given them to you. We can send it again.
Okay, thank you.
The Office of Secretary General published a report earlier this year that reviewed the Education and Training Administration spending over the past 10 years and found that upwards of $489 billion in grant funds intended for workforce development were inefficiently used. The OIG expressed 3 ongoing areas of concern in how ETA is handling taxpayer dollars, including how the agency is awarding grants, reviewing grantees' use of funds, and measuring grantee performance. Any misuse of hard-earned taxpayer dollars always unacceptable. We're in the middle of job crisis, and we must ensure money is being put to its proper use so that we can close the skills gap and get Americans back to work. What steps is ETA taking to ensure grant applicants' proposals meet all program solicitation requirements?
Yeah, I can't speak to what happened 8.5 years ago as far as the grants, but I'll look into that for you and get back to you on that. But I can tell you, our team at ETA is working extremely hard to make sure that we're getting as many grant applications through the process and we're getting the funding to those applicants, because right now, this moment in time, as you alluded to in your opening statement.
But what we need to know is that the money is being used for their intended purposes. Getting the money out the door is one thing, but getting accountability is even more important.
I was going to get there. My point is, we make sure we follow up with the grant applicants. That's something that I've demanded responses from my team to make sure that every dollar that we're spending of taxpayers' dollars in America is getting spent in the proper way.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Moskowitz from Florida for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Well, breaking news. The federal government has too much red tape. Right? Here we go again. Not a serious hearing, and actually looking at specific government regulation and red tape. Look at the name of this hearing. It doesn't say executive branch red tape or federal government red tape. It's titled The Biden Administration Campaign to Bury America in Red Tape. This is their hearing. Literally, just red tape with Joe Biden's name written on it. Just make it real simple for people. That's the point of this hearing. It's not about solving problems. It's about red painter's tape with Joe Biden's name written on it. And look what Joe Biden has done. Look, it's right there. Here's the proof. Professor Katzen, serious question. Was red tape invented by Joe Biden?
No, sir.
Okay, good. You know, my colleagues across the aisle used to be the party of smaller government, and I wish they still had credibility in wanting to shrink the size of government, but they want more government now. Government in women's bodies, government in the bedroom, government in the library, government in corporate investments, government in Disney World. You know, and all we want to do is go back to Trump. I mean, every hearing, it's like, just if we could just go back to what Trump did, you know, the loser of the 2020 election, the loser of the Georgia Senate races, the loser of the 2018 midterms. By the way, just to jog your memory, the Trump administration finalized more federal rules in the last year of its administration than any other final year of any presidency in American history, more than Obama. I know it's inconvenient timing, but perhaps we actually need more regulation with presidents taking nuclear codes and cuddling with them and showering with them in their homes. You know, I want to answer the representative's question on ATF and pistol braces. Has that ever happened before? Well, in fact, yes. It happened under the Trump administration. With Trump's ATF, they banned bump stocks. Bump stocks were legal, and then they weren't. The Trump administration's ATF did that. By the way, good decision. People shouldn't be able to turn guns into automatic weapons. Let's not forget that some of our colleagues, you know, went on camera when Sacha Baron Cohen got into their office and said that they think kindergartners should have guns. We heard that this is all about big corporations, that big corporations now like regulation. Well, by the way, just a little public service announcement. If you're mad at big corporations, you don't have to take their money anymore. That's not like a mandatory thing. By the way, Professor Mulligan, you brought up Operation Warp Speed. I just want to give you an update on that. Some of our colleagues across the aisle now don't believe that deregulation was very good. They've soured on the deregulation of Operation Warp Speed and actually believe that that led to bad outcomes. I don't agree, but I just wanted you to have that update if you've been following the rhetoric coming from that side of the chamber. We heard about the marketplace. Let the marketplace decide these decisions. Really? We had a whole hearing on ESG. That was the marketplace talking. Nope, they didn't like it. Government regulation, we got to ban it. They want to ban it, more regulation, because they didn't like what the marketplace had to say. Listen, regulations are hurting small businesses. They are. So let's actually work together and solve that problem. Paperwork for a mortgage is too burdensome. Let's make that easier. That should be the point of this hearing. How can we help the American people? How can we reduce regulation? Let's talk about specific ideas that we can do that together. No one here believes that we don't have enough regulation. No, there are things that we could reduce things to make it easier for the American people. By the way, we're going to have to remove red tape and shrink bureaucracy if we want to compete with China. We're going to have to do those things. But maybe Congress should work again. You know, you're mad about all the rulemaking in the executive branch? It's because this place stopped lawmaking. We don't make laws here anymore because we're too busy doing this. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Donald.
Minute.
Yes.
Without objection, the gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Most of you have probably never heard of Cedar Hill, Texas, but you know their story. A gunman walks into a hospital, which should be a place of healing, and instead inflicts immeasurable pain and trauma. That is the story of Cedar Hill on July 25th, 2023. A terrifying day for my constituents, but an ordinary day for America, at least the America of today, where guns are gods and people are pawns. The America where the gun lobby wins and we, the people, lose. People lose their lives. They lose a sense of sanity, and we all lose a sense of security. Make no mistake, when the radical right wins, we, the people, lose our rights. They have no clue what it means to be truly pro-life. If they did, they'd write or at least support legislation that meets the moment, a moment full of death and destruction that is crying out for solutions and sanity. And with that, I will yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to the rest of the House for 1 minute and revise